I never thought that flying out to spend Christmas with my daughter would end with me watching strangers board a plane while my hand shook from humiliation. At gate B26, I stood with my boarding pass crumpled in one fist, rereading Rachel's text. "Oh, sorry, Mom. We already opened presents. You can fly back." My return flight wasn't for another 10 days. I hadn't even unzipped my suitcase. I just stared at the message until the letters blurred. The gate agent called final boarding for Denver. I didn't move. 2 hours earlier, I had landed in Aspen, exactly on time. No delays, no mix-ups. I'd packed gifts for the kids, a quilt I made for Rachel, and a tin of lemon shortbread cookies she used to beg for every winter. I waited outside arrivals in the cold for almost 30 minutes, watching SUVs pull in and out. No one came. When I called, it rang once, then went to voicemail. When I texted, nothing. I finally paid $70 for a shuttle back to the airport, still believing maybe they'd call once I got Wi-Fi again. Instead, I got that message. Casual, like I'd simply mixed up the time. We already opened presents. Like I was the one who forgot. Behind me, the terminal played some canned version of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," and the irony of it made my face go hot. I walked to the bathroom just to be alone, locked myself in a stall, and sat on the closed toilet lid while a child whined at the sink. My coat was still zipped. My fingers ached. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because it was the kind of pain that doesn't let you cry. It just sits on your chest and waits for you to break under it. At the ticket counter, I changed my flight. The woman didn't ask why. She just tapped her keyboard and said, "You'll make the 8:55. I nodded. Said thank you. My voice sounded normal. I kept the cookie tin sealed in my bag. 3 weeks earlier, Rachel called while I was seasoning a roast, saying they wanted to make Christmas extra special this year. Just the 5 of us in Aspen. Her voice was sugary, practiced. She said they'd found a rental with a fireplace and a big open kitchen. Plenty of snow for the boys. I pictured pine beams, cocoa mugs. Her soft smile turning toward me like it used to when she needed help folding laundry or filling out college forms. Then she said, "But we'll need you to skip Thanksgiving. We don't want to overload the boys with too much family in 1 month." I asked if everything was all right. She laughed, tight and high. "Of course. It's just, you know how sensitive Micah gets, and Kyle's been swamped at work. We want to make Christmas perfect." She used that word again. Perfect. And like a fool, I agreed. I told her I'd stay home, that it made sense to space things out. She said she'd text me the Airbnb link so I could see the magic. 20 minutes later, I got it. The place looked like something from a catalog. Glass walls, fur throws, someone's version of rustic wealth. I told myself it was okay that I wasn't spending Thanksgiving with them, that maybe she really wanted to give me something better. I used my own money for the flight. Rachel offered points, but her tone was just a little too relieved when I declined. I booked the ticket that night, round trip, 10 days. I bought new thermal socks and wrapped the gifts early, including a box of painted wooden animals for Micah, like the ones Rachel used to play with. I thought maybe, in Aspen, we'd sit around the fire and she'd finally ask about my life again. Maybe she'd hand me the baby and go take a nap. Maybe we'd laugh about old times without me calculating whether I was overstaying or overspeaking. I roasted a whole turkey alone that Thanksgiving, froze most of it in Ziplocs. Rachel texted that evening, "Hope it's not too lonely today. Can't wait to see you soon." I reread that text while packing, still believing it. They'd been pushing me out slowly, like a chair dragged from the table inch by inch. I just hadn't wanted to see it. It started in spring. Rachel forgot Mother's Day, claimed they were off the grid at some yoga retreat, then posted photos of bottomless mimosas and brunch with Kyle's mother. I didn't say anything. I sent a card anyway, with a pressed violet tucked inside. In June, my birthday passed without a call. She texted the next day, "Sorry, Mom, crazy weekend. Hope it was peaceful." That word, peaceful, landed like a slap, as if quiet neglect was a gift, as if I should be grateful for being left alone. Then came the conversation in September. I offered to take Micah and Ezra for the weekend so they could rest. Rachel hesitated. "They're just not responding well to old people energy lately," she said. I asked what that meant. She backpedaled, blamed their preschool's new rhythms, said Ezra had started biting and they didn't want to confuse him. I told her I understood. Then I sat on my couch and stared at the same children's books I'd kept from her childhood, now collecting dust in the hall closet. I'd already bought new bubble bath for them. A little rubber shark. I told myself I was being sensitive, that Rachel was overwhelmed, that maybe I was too. I doubled down on being easy, never stayed too long, brought groceries when I visited, paid for the new stroller without being asked. But with each visit, the space between us grew heavier. Kyle barely looked up from his laptop. Rachel kept her tone clipped, light, as if she were managing a client. Still, even with all that, I believed Christmas would be different. Aspen sounded like an invitation back in. Like she remembered I used to be her home, I wrapped those gifts with care. Packed her favorite tea. I even brought the velvet box Dan left for her, his last gift sealed before the surgery. I thought she'd open it by the fire and maybe, for a minute, remember who we were. Instead, she forgot I existed. When I called to ask why they hadn't picked me up from the airport, Kyle answered, "Not Rachel. And not in private." "Hi, Susan," he said, too cheerful. Then his voice echoed, like he'd set the phone on a kitchen island. "We assumed you'd cancel. Rachel's exhausted. The kids are overstimulated. No hello. No, we're so sorry. Just that. Assumed. Overstimulated. Exhausted." As if I'd created a mess by arriving exactly as planned. I heard cabinet doors opening in the background, the sound of dishes clinking. Then Rachel's voice, muffled. "Who is it?" She didn't come to the phone. I told Kyle I was at the airport. I said the shuttle dropped me off again, because no one answered. I kept my tone flat, measured. I didn't want to cry. "I flew in," I said. "I'm here." Long pause. He cleared his throat. "Right, of course. It's been a lot today. You know how travel days are. We figured maybe you got delayed or changed your mind." "I didn't," I said. "I'm standing in the terminal." Another pause. Rachel still didn't speak. Kyle said something to her I couldn't catch. Then back to me. "Let's regroup tomorrow, okay? It's late and everyone's wiped." Tomorrow. As if this was a casual check-in. As if I was a client rescheduling lunch. I said nothing. I hung up. Not out of spite. Just because there was nothing else to say that wouldn't break me open. I sat down on a vinyl bench near baggage claim, even though I hadn't checked a bag. My legs were trembling, and I needed to sit before someone saw me fall. A janitor passed by, pushing a cart that squeaked with every turn of the wheels. I looked at my phone screen. No missed calls. No apology. Just the last thing I'd sent. "Landed!" with a smiley face. I deleted it. Then I turned my phone off. I didn't want to see anymore. An hour later, I booked a motel room near the airport. Not the cheapest one, not the worst, just a room. I didn't unpack. That night, back in my Denver apartment, I boiled water for tea and opened my laptop. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I was cold, like something had been cauterized in me. I clicked through my inbox until I found the folder marked Estate Final 2021. Inside were the old contact chains, the scanned PDFs, the probate closure. And there it was, Fred Talbot. Attorney, executor support, long retired, but still practicing for select families like ours. I started a new message and kept it short. Subject: urgent. Estate review request. Dear Mr. Talbot, I would appreciate a confidential meeting as soon as possible regarding distribution activity from my late husband's trust. I attached nothing. Not yet. Just signed it with my full name and added my cell below. Then I CC'd Rachel. No explanation, no message. Just added her address like a signature move. I knew she checked email with her coffee every morning, even before the kids woke up. I wanted her to see my name beside Fred's and feel it land. It wasn't revenge. I don't believe in revenge. It was a signal. A line drawn. If they wanted to treat me like a ghost, they'd have to explain it to someone who filed court records for a living. I hit send. Then I logged out. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with my socks still on, lights off, TV running low. I wasn't watching, just letting the noise cover the sound of myself breathing too hard. Around 4 a.m., I got up and pulled the suitcase into the living room. I unpacked slowly. Every time I touched one of the wrapped presents, I felt my hands tense. I placed them on the hall table like they might disappear overnight. Last out was the quilt I made for Rachel. Navy and ivory, stitched by hand. I didn't fold it. I laid it across the couch and stared at it until my eyes burned. In the silence, one thing settled fully in my chest. I was done explaining myself to people who never listened. Fred called just after 8, his voice still gravelly from sleep but alert. "Susan? I got your email. Are you all right?" I told him I was fine. I wasn't, but that wasn't his job to sort through. I asked if there had been any recent movements on Dan's trust. He paused, then said he'd check the portal and call me right back. 5 minutes later, he did. "Did you authorize the disbursement Rachel submitted last week?" he asked. "For a legacy property renovation?" I sat up straighter on the couch, feet flat on the floor. "No, I didn't. What property?" He read from his screen. "No address listed. Just a memo line. Structural prep, legacy site. Signed December 18th. Comes with a Form 14A attached. Says you approved it via email." I asked him to forward the document. When it came through, I opened it and stared at the attachment. The letterhead looked right. So did the signature. My name in cursive, familiar enough to pass a glance. But the date was off. And the font used in the body? Dan hated Times New Roman. He once made the estate paralegal change a whole batch of filings just because the format didn't match. He was meticulous. So was I. I opened my Dropbox vault, Dan's Trust, read only, and pulled up my original Form 14A scanned from our home printer 3 years ago. The lines matched, but the signature placement on Rachel's version was wrong by exactly 1 line. I knew because Dan always said it should sit flush with the margin. Her copy had it indented. I forwarded both versions to Fred without commentary. He replied within 2 minutes. "I see it. Thank you. This is serious." It didn't feel like a win. It felt like finding out someone had stolen your handwriting and used it to buy a house with your dead husband's money. I sat back and stared at the closed box of cookies on the table. Still unopened, still wrapped in ribbon, meant for a family that never planned to unwrap anything with me. After the call, I stayed at my desk with the lamp on low, staring at Rachel's forged form like it might confess something if I waited long enough. She hadn't even used my usual email signature. Just typed, "Best Mom." I hadn't signed an email that way in years. I opened the Dropbox folder again, not out of suspicion, out of duty. Dan and I kept everything in that vault. Medical forms, property filings, even old scans of our joint account logs. Nothing had been touched since his death. Not by me, not by anyone. I verified that every document still showed the original upload timestamp. No edits, no moves, and most important, no copies made in the last 6 months. The last access before this week had been mine, in March, when I'd checked the disbursement schedule from my own records. Rachel wouldn't have had that password. At least not from me. Dan never gave it to her either. He believed in boundaries. But then I remembered the week she helped pack his study. That last week in hospice, when Kyle insisted I rest while they handled logistics, she'd had access to his laptop, his desk, his notebooks. I opened the trash folder in Dropbox. That's where I found it. A deleted item from late November, a download log of the trust documents. The recovery record was faint, but it showed her device's IP, matching the one Kyle had used to send holiday invites last year. She didn't just forge a form. She helped herself to the archive. I downloaded a clean copy of the access log and backed it up twice, once on a flash drive, once to an encrypted folder on my desktop. Then I made a new subfolder, Evidence, December 2025. I added a timestamped note, Form 14A not signed. See attached original plus altered copy. Activity on deleted file suggests unauthorized download. It felt like picking up a weapon I never wanted to own. But I wasn't going to hand over my silence again. At 10:04 p.m., I added one line to my planner in red ink. Request audit of all trust activity. Monday. By Boxing Day, she broke. A text lit up my phone just before sunrise. "Mom, can we please talk? There's been a mix-up with the financials. I didn't mean to upset you." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Let's make this right." A mix-up. Like she'd misplaced a grocery receipt. I didn't answer, not out of pride, but because I wanted her to sit with it. Let the silence teach her something my voice never could. I forwarded the message to Fred without comment. 2 minutes later, he replied, "Good. She's rattled. That gives us time." Time for what? I wasn't sure yet. But the ground had shifted. I felt it in how quickly she folded. Rachel never panicked. Not as a child, not as a mother, and certainly not as someone who thought she was holding all the cards. She and Kyle had built their life on managed perception. Clean houses, curated posts, gridded smiles. That message cracked it. I spent the morning logging back into the trust portal, this time not just to verify forms, but to comb through every transaction since Dan passed. I made a spreadsheet. Date, memo line, amount, payee. One by one, by mid-morning, 2 entries stood out like bruises. Wellness Advisor Stipend minus $4,200. Grandchild Development Fund minus $9,800. Both routed to the same LLC KS Langwell Consulting. Kyle's company. A firm that, last I checked, hadn't offered child services or therapy. When I pulled their listed services from the Secretary of State site, it still read, Strategic Branding for Mid-Size Startups. I flagged both entries and screen captured the routing numbers. Then I printed the statements and laid them out on the kitchen table, beside Dan's framed photo. I didn't speak to it. I wasn't the type. But I looked him in the eyes and thought, they didn't even try to be clever. The doorbell rang once. A package. I signed without reading the label and left the box on the entry table. I wasn't expecting anything. Nothing I needed was coming in cardboard now. What I needed was a clean record and a courtroom that still knew the difference between care and theft. I took the printouts and set them beside my keyboard, then searched for Kyle's LLC through the Colorado Business Registry. It was still active, still listed under his name, and still registered to a P.O. box in Boulder. The email attached was one I recognized. He used it to send the digital invite to Ezra's second birthday party, the one they forgot, to mail to me. I clicked through to his business website, though I already knew what I'd find. Empty buzzwords, glossy stock photos, and vague promises. Brand narrative solutions. Market clarity for mission-driven founders. I found no mention of children, wellness, or anything remotely tied to the entries he billed to Dan's trust. Back on the portal, I opened the disbursement logs again. The Grandchild Development Fund had cleared on December 12th. The Wellness Advisor fee cleared December 9th. Both marked pre-approved. By whom, the entry didn't say. Normally, I would have gotten a co-notification. Nothing had come through. No flags, no alerts. Rachel must have tampered with the notification settings after the access breach. That confirmed it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was coordinated. Rachel supplied the cover story. Kyle moved the money. I started a new folder on my desktop, LLC Fraud, Langwell, and dropped in everything. Screenshots, printouts, copies of the trust's activity reports, even the archived web pages. At the last second, I also downloaded their holiday card from the family blog. Rachel, in matching flannel with the boys, Kyle standing behind them, hands on shoulders. I couldn't say why I kept it. Maybe I needed to see the face of the man who stole from my dead husband while smiling into a Nikon lens. Fred called at 5:20 p.m. Voice tense now. "Susan, I need to come by tomorrow. I found something worse." I asked him what. He said a revision to Dan's will was submitted to probate in September. It removes you as trustee. I gripped the edge of the desk. On what grounds? Fred exhaled slowly. Rachel submitted a medical claim. Said your memory's deteriorating. That you're no longer able to manage the estate. I didn't speak. I just wrote 2 words across the top of the folder. In Sharpie they lied. Fred arrived the next morning wearing his usual wool coat, but his eyes looked sharper than I'd ever seen them. He laid his briefcase on the table, unlatched the brass clasps, and pulled out a printed copy of the revision. "They filed it quietly," he said. "No challenge notice, no advisory to you. Submitted it through Kyle's paralegal friend in Boulder." I skimmed the document. My name, once listed as co-trustee and primary steward of Dan's assets, was now struck. In its place, Kyle Langwell, executor in full, citing concerns over prior trustees' cognitive reliability. It was typed like legal language always is, cold, deliberate, distant. But the sting landed just the same. "They used the term declining mental capacity," Fred said, tapping the clause. "Claimed you'd exhibited signs of disorientation and mismanagement over the last year." "What signs?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "They didn't list any." He pointed to the attached affidavit. "It's vague on purpose. References A, family concern, and informal observations. No physician listed. Just Rachel's signature and a blank line under supporting party that's been crossed out." I looked at the line. Someone had written a name there and scribbled it out hastily. A single curve of a lowercase g still visible. I set the pages aside. "Do I need a full capacity exam?" Fred shook his head. "You need one already done, preemptively. Someone credible, and not handpicked by them. I can get you a referral today." "Good," I said. "Make the appointment." Fred nodded and sat back. "They gambled on you being passive. They forgot who you were when Dan got sick. They forgot who handled his accounts, his care, his passwords, everything. This was never about you losing your grip. It's about you standing in their way." He said it like a fact. Not flattery, not comfort, just truth. I didn't flinch. I went to my filing cabinet, pulled out the blue folder, marked Dan Video Calls 2019, and dropped it on the table. "Let me show you what Dan actually said about all this," I told him. I queued up the recordings one by one. They were all backed up twice. Once in the cloud, once on a hard drive. Dan insisted we keep in a fireproof safe. He didn't trust digital permanence. Said people like to rewrite things once the witnesses were gone. The clip I needed was labeled April 12th, Trust Final Draft. Dan was in his favorite flannel, a wool blanket over his legs, still lucid but moving slower. The call had been for Fred's benefit, a final walkthrough of his intentions. Rachel had begged him to hand the trust entirely to her. He'd told her no. She wasn't ready. She didn't listen well. In the recording, Dan looks into the webcam and says, "I want Susan to stay trustee. Period. She handled every tax, every bill, every damn home repair. If anyone tries to edge her out, I want this on record. Don't let Rachel rush you out of your own life." Fred watched in silence. When the video ended, he sat back, jaw tight. "It's admissible." He was sound, deliberate. "Date and time are clear. You've got a digital timestamp and a physical backup." I opened the safe, handed him the labeled drive. "There's more," I said. "One where he tells Rachel flat out that Kyle's not to be given financial authority." Fred took the drive gently, like it was made of bone. "We'll get this transcribed, certified, and logged with the court. Once that's in place, we can motion to invalidate the amended will." I nodded, hands folded in my lap. I'd prepared for grief when Dan died, but I hadn't prepared for this. The slow gutting of everything we built, rebranded as family restructuring. That night, I sat in the quiet and opened the little ornament box I hadn't touched since Christmas Eve. Inside was the last decoration Dan ever gave me, a porcelain dove, hand-painted tiny gold flecks in the wings. On the bottom, in his handwriting, "To my Firebird, love D." I set it on the windowsill, facing out, not hidden, not tucked away. By morning, Fred had confirmed the video's legal weight. It was going in the probate packet. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of peppermint tea gone lukewarm, the porcelain dove watching me from the windowsill like it was waiting for an answer. I hadn't cried since the airport. Not when Rachel lied. Not when Kyle doctored records. Not when Fred said I'd been erased. But now, with Dan's voice still echoing in my ears and the dove looking back at me like it remembered who I used to be, something gave way. Not sobs, not a flood, Just a quiet release. The kind that comes when there's no one to explain yourself to anymore. I let it happen. When it passed, I rinsed the mug and dried it by hand. Then I opened my file drawer again, this time pulling out a copy of my own will. I flipped through the pages to the section marked Succession and Personal Effects. Rachel was still listed as medical proxy, trustee backup, property beneficiary. I crossed her out in red ink, one line at a time, slow and precise. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I finally saw her clearly. Not as my child, but as a grown woman who had made deliberate choices, who counted on my silence, who thought I'd swallow betrayal as long as it came with a polite smile and a holiday card. She wasn't going to get my name to spend. Not anymore. I left Dan's name untouched. The house in Estes Park stayed in his trust. Untouched. But I opened a blank sheet and started drafting a supplemental letter to accompany the estate file. My own voice, my terms, no gloss. I listed every action Rachel and Kyle had taken since Dan died. Dates, transactions, gaps, language they used. Nothing dramatic, just clean, factual statements. I'd learned from Dan, you don't fight a liar with emotion, you fight them with evidence. By the time I finished, the sky outside had turned that colorless gray that comes before snow. I didn't check the forecast. I didn't care. I was done playing nice. And I had just begun writing things down. I called Fred first thing and told him to schedule a full estate review for January 2nd. No delay, no Zoom link. In person. I wanted Rachel and Kyle there, sitting across from me, forced to speak their version of the truth with the lights on. Fred didn't hesitate. I'll draft the notice. Formal invitation. I'll copy their attorney on it, just in case they try to stall. Make sure the CPA's present, I added. I want the ledger open. He agreed, then said, be ready, they'll spin. Let them. I'd heard enough spin to last me 10 Christmases. After we hung up, I typed out the message myself, addressed to Rachel directly. There's been activity on Dad's estate that needs immediate clarification. I've requested a review with Fred and the Trust's CPA January 2nd at 10 a.m. Please attend, in person. I didn't add warmth. I didn't use exclamation points. It was the tone she respected from other people, curt, professional, free of maternal softness. I signed it Susan M. Langwell and hit send. She didn't reply that day, but I watched the read receipt land 5 minutes after delivery. I spent the next few hours organizing documents in order. First by date, then by type. Originals in plastic sleeves. Altered versions printed in red margin format, so no one could feign confusion. I made a copy of the forensic log from Dropbox, added my signed letter from Dr. Yamada, confirming my cognitive baseline, and inserted 2 DVD recordings from Dan, all labeled, all traceable. That night, I slept. Not well, but uninterrupted. No pacing, no tea at midnight. I'd stopped rehearsing what I would say to her. I didn't need to perform anymore. My job wasn't to explain. My job was to present the facts and let them hang there, shameful and full of teeth. Before bed, I opened the wooden chest at the foot of the guest bed, the one I'd kept for the boys. Inside were the unopened Christmas gifts, each still wrapped in paper I chose with them in mind. I didn't throw them out. I relabeled the box, Hold, Pending Custody Outcome. January 2nd. I arrived at Fred's office 15 minutes early and waited in the hallway until the secretary unlocked the conference room. I carried one canvas bag. Documents, flash drives, Dan's handwritten notes. No purse, no makeup, just what mattered. At 9:59, Rachel walked in wearing head-to-toe Lululemon like she was headed to a Pilates class. Not a formal review of the estate she tampered with. Her nails were fresh. Her smile was the kind she used when cameras were around, tight, effortless, performative. Kyle came in right behind her, carrying a leather folio and a portable latte, dressed like a consultant on a second-tier panel. Neither of them said hello. Fred entered last. He nodded to me, then to the CPA, who was already seated and reviewing the ledger. Let's begin, he said. Rachel started first. Before we get into the documents, I just want to say, if there's been any confusion or miscommunication, there hasn't, I cut in. I opened the folder, laid out the original Form 14A, then the version she'd submitted. "This signature is forged." She blinked, mouth slightly open, like I'd broken an unspoken rule. Kyle shifted in his seat but stayed quiet. Fred stepped in. "Susan has kept a complete digital vault of all signed trust documents. Metadata confirms no such approval was ever issued. The version submitted to our office was altered." I slid across the audit log. There were 2 additional disbursements routed to Kyle's LLC. One labeled Child Development, another Wellness Advisor. Neither service was provided. "I've already cross-checked the LLC's registered services." Kyle leaned forward. "We were under the impression those expenses fell under discretionary support. It was all meant to honor Dan's wishes. Dan never authorized you to touch a cent," I said, voice low. "He said so, on record." Fred placed the DVD envelope on the table. "There are 2 videos. In one, Dan explicitly confirms Susan is to remain trustee. In the other, he bars Kyle from financial oversight. Both were filmed in April 2019. Rachel's face froze. Her hand went to her mouth. For the first time in months, she said nothing. I watched them flinch as each piece landed. No raised voice, no outburst, just evidence stacking higher, heavier, undeniable. Kyle shifted in his chair, thumb tapping against the side of his coffee cup. "This is all being blown out of proportion. We were acting on family interest. The wellness stipend was for support during an incredibly difficult year. Emotional labor isn't free." Fred leaned forward. "You billed Dan's trust $12,000 for emotional labor. You routed it through a consulting LLC that has never, at any time, been contracted for therapeutic services." Rachel finally spoke, voice brittle. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. We were trying to build something sustainable for the boys. Dad would have wanted. Dan wanted accountability," I said, pulling out the signed transcript from the April call. "And he said, on record, you weren't to manage his legacy. You chose to ignore that. Then you chose to lie." The CPA cleared her throat. "The memo lines, the disbursement codes, they were manipulated post-entry. You used administrator credentials to override standard trust notifications." She paused. "That's felony-level fraud if pursued." Rachel's hand shook. I saw it. Small, involuntary tremors as she tried to maintain composure. Kyle's jaw flexed, the calm consultant's mask starting to crack. Fred laid down the last document, a notice of intent to file a formal fraud report with the Colorado Probate Court, naming Rachel as the submitting party and Kyle as a direct beneficiary of unauthorized funds. "You will both receive this officially within 3 business days," he said. "Susan remains primary trustee. Effective immediately, your access to all trust channels is revoked." Kyle's face reddened. "This is ridiculous. We were trying to protect the legacy." Fred cut him off. "You don't protect a legacy by stealing from it." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I collected the materials, slid them back into my canvas bag, and stood. "I expect a written statement of acknowledgement by end of week," I said. "No more private apologies, no more family talks, paper trail or nothing." They didn't follow me out. I didn't go home right after. I stopped by Dr. Yamada's office first. Her receptionist waved me in without a wait. Fred had called ahead. The evaluation had already been prepared, notarized, printed, sealed in a manila envelope with my name typed clean across the front. Dr. Yamada met me in the hallway herself. "I'm sorry it came to this," she said gently, "but I'm glad you asked for it." I opened the envelope before I even reached the parking lot. Inside was a full cognitive assessment, signed and stamped. No ambiguity, no qualifiers. Client presents as mentally sharp, emotionally resilient, and fully capable of managing independent financial, legal, and medical decisions. The line under family concerns read, "No corroborating evidence presented." I folded it back into the envelope and tucked it into the passenger seat. If they tried to question me in court, this would go in first. Back at the apartment, I placed it in the evidence binder. Front sleeve, clear view. Rachel had once used this same psychologist for Ezra's biting phase. That irony wasn't lost on me. I considered mailing her a copy directly, but decided no. She could get it the formal way, through Fred's filing. I made tea, ate something real for the first time in days. There was still residue in my chest. Grief, maybe, or the hollow that comes when you realize the people you raised believe their entitlement is love. But there was peace too. Not the soft kind. The hard-edged kind that comes after you stop begging to be seen. Around 4, Fred called with an update. The official filings were confirmed. Copies would be served by end of week. I thanked him. Not for winning, for staying steady. Then I went to my room, opened the cedar box Dan built me years ago, and pulled out the envelope labeled Cottage Estes. I ran my thumb over the deed. The notice came through the next morning, stamped and certified. Rachel officially removed as successor trustee. Fred forwarded the full filing, along with a scanned receipt of delivery to her attorney. I read it twice, slowly. It didn't bring joy, it brought air. Like someone finally opened a window in a room I hadn't realized was choking me. They didn't contest it. Not yet. Not a word. No emergency injunction. No countermotion. Just silence, which told me more than any apology ever could. They weren't sorry. They were calculating, probably scrambling behind the scenes, trying to reframe the narrative. Misunderstood intentions, oversight, emotional strain. But the law didn't care how it felt. It cared what they signed, what they moved, what they stole. By noon, Fred confirmed Kyle's LLC had been flagged for audit under potential misuse of family trust funds. He'd have to open the books, line by line. I pictured him in that sleek kitchen of theirs, scrolling through bank statements, realizing the tidy compartments they built on lies were now being dismantled under court order. I didn't celebrate. I took a walk. Cold, sharp air. No headphones. Just the sound of snow crunching under my boots as I moved block by block. Every breath felt earned. My pace was steady. No limp. My knee had held. When I got back, a courier envelope was waiting at my door. No return label. Inside, a small velvet box and a folded note. The handwriting was Rachel's. Found this in storage. Thought you might want it back. Sorry about everything. R. Inside the box was the dove. The same one she claimed she'd lost during the move last spring. The same one Dan had painted and given me the year before he died. I didn't text her. I didn't write back. I just walked to the shelf, cleared a spot near the framed photo of Dan, and placed it there. Centered, clean, no dust. The next day, Fred called one last time. We've completed the estate review, he said. Dan's final instructions stand. The Estes Park cottage is yours, Susan. Unrestricted, uncontested. I've had the locks changed and the keys are ready. I picked them up in person. No courier, no fanfare, just a small envelope placed in my hand, warm from being held behind the desk. I drove up 2 days later. Roads were clear, sky cold and quiet. When I reached the cottage, everything looked exactly as Dan left it. Cedar siding, blue shutters, the dent in the mailbox from the winter he backed into it trying to make me laugh. Inside, the air was still. No ghosts. Just space. I opened the kitchen windows, let the mountain breeze cut through the stale warmth. Then I unpacked slowly. One quilt, one tin of cookies, one ornament. I hung the dove above the fireplace. No ceremony. Just placement. Like it belonged. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I made tea, sat on the couch, watched the trees shift in the wind without bracing for a phone call or another blow. There was grief, yes. But it didn't own me. I had the land. I had the paper trail. And I had the keys. That was enough.